Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site, covering the Arizona Cardinals. And for this third show of the week, it is the second of our two Cardinals-Falcons preview shows. You heard me and Seth do our preview, picks, and prop bets show yesterday, or it would have dropped Friday. And dropping today on this Saturday is the preview show that I have with Will McFadden, one of the hosts of the Bleav in Falcons podcast, and also a contributor over at the Falcoholic, one of SB Nation's NFL sites. So he's kind of a compadre of Seth over there on that network. Will, glad to have you on. How you been?
I'm doing well, Jess. I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to talk about this bird-oriented matchup we got coming up on Sunday.
Yes, it is. Cardinals-Falcons, a matchup that, if we exclude the Cardinals' one playoff win against the Falcons way back, that is 16-16. So the winner of this game takes the lead in the all-time regular season series. And the Falcons they've done really well. I think it's 4 out of the last 5 they won, with the only win being in Kyler Murray's rookie season, the only game that Kyler has actually played in. Which was
I was at that game.
That was a wild game. That was a wild game, and it was one of the games you're like, yeah, Kyler's got it. Kyler's got it.
He made some big throws in that game. I remember there was one like Devondre Campbell just totally blew his coverage, and it was like a 35-yard gain just over the middle. I think Matt Bryant missed. Did he miss an extra point to kind of, that was the difference? It was like 33-32 or something like that.
34-33, and I can
okay.
I can pull that up. Let's go back to, because it was after the Cardinals had started like 0-2-1 or 0-3-1, and then they won a whole bunch. They won 3 games in a row there's the Seahawks they lost. Was it the Falcons was week 5? Nope, that would have been, there we go, 34-33, and is that the Atlanta, with under 2 minutes left, scored what would have been the game-tying touchdown, and the kick was missed.
Yep.
Oh
I remember that so distinctly because I was with the Falcons at the time, and they played the Texans the week before that, and they absolutely got destroyed by Houston. And this was 2019. Dan Quinn was starting to kind of like feel some of the heat, and they decided to just make it a double road trip. And so they went out to, right by Arizona State's campus. That's kind of where they practiced throughout the week, set up camp. So I flew out there to cover the team throughout that week. And it was hiked Camelback Mountain. It was a lovely trip. And then it ended on the worst note possible with just like a bummer.
Should be overtime. What? The extra point?
Exactly. And so it was just kind of a bad season. Really was starting to go downhill at that point, and you felt like, ooh, this team's a little bit, in the desert. They're snake bitten. Who knows? Like that's kind of what the feeling was at that point. So I remember that game distinctly.
So yeah, and Matt. So the quarterback situation. If we could just talk that, what is it? Just the ghost of Matt Ryan, or what is it that it seems like this team overall has a lot of pieces in place? The skill players, you got Tyler Algier, Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and it seems like, and for me, especially as we watch the team over the last season and a half, is you watch this team and you go, are they good? Yeah, they're good. Wait, are they good? That's kind of been how you look like they have the pieces. Arthur Smith's got some good things going, and you're like, oh, okay. They're getting there. Oh, they're good. Are they good? This is kind of like my reaction to the Falcons, is that they are like the Cardinals for this year. They're early in the year. I called them a good bad team, and
for sure.
And basically now I've been to the point where it's a bad team that's also a good team. Oh, it's our defensively. They're a bad defense that is sometimes good. I think the Falcons are a good team that's also bad.
I think that's a fair way to put it. I think they feel like a car that's got restrictor plates on at times, and that's why I think you're seeing level of frustration amongst the fan base. And I mentioned Dan Quinn's seat kind of getting hot during that 2019 season. Internally, I still have a hard time believing that Arthur Smith is, really on a hot seat right now. Like it's 4-5. They've been in the thick of the playoff race, really all 3 seasons he's been here, which is incredible given the lack of talent that they kind of had the first 2 years. This season is the really first season that he and Terry Fontenot have been able to build a roster that they really had a big hand in bringing, because they didn't have any financial freedom the last 2 off seasons due to the contracts Thomas Dimitroff and kind of the previous regime doled out. And so this year 3 was always going to be highlighted a little bit as the year that you need to reach the playoffs, the year that you need to win your division, kind of reach that next step. And it's interesting. We've seen teams, I think, go about building their roster in 2 ways, right? The first is you try to land your rookie quarterback, and then you just use all of that money that you save from having a rookie quarterback, and you build up the team around him. The other is kind of the Eagles model, where you build up the team and then you hope that you find that missing piece quarterback, plug him in, and then you go from there. I think the Falcons are opting more towards that latter model, where they've used their draft picks not to get a quarterback outside of Desmond Ridder, but that's a 3rd-round pick. You're using your premier picks to kind of get high offensive talent, and then they brought in a ton of defensive veterans this offseason, and you're seeing the impact that it's had on the ball. But the big question mark has always been quarterback, right? And last season, Marcus Mariota, the Falcons really, and I give Arthur Smith a lot of credit for this, they changed their offense and made it such a weird, unique throwback offense, because I think they knew that the threat Marcus Mariota presented with his legs, you could just kind of have a higher floor of competency, because that's an extra threat in the run game. It changes the math on defense, and it kind of swings it in the offense's favor. They don't have that this year. And so I think you're seeing an offense that is, has a lower floor at times. It does have, I think, a little bit of a higher ceiling. And we have seen Desmond Ridder prior to being benched. He was making some notable improvements. He was just turning the ball over way too frequently and at way too critical of a time. And so now you enter Taylor Heineke, maybe try to raise that floor a little bit, even if it maybe lowers the ceiling of the team. And I think you saw a little bit more consistent play from the Falcons last week. But the quarterback situation is still the biggest question. I still don't think we've seen the last of Desmond Ridder, but that's kind of where the Falcons are at. It feels like a team that is, the individual parts are actually better than the sum of the whole right now, which is not what you want.
Right. So I think the move to Taylor Heineke, and Taylor Heineke to me is an answer, but is never the answer. And do you think that Desmond Ridder still can be the guy? I loved him in college. But it's like what offensively the Falcons have done since he took over has been really, it's been oddly uninspiring overall, even though a stat that I had no idea, and I couldn't find the stat anywhere. Jonathan Gannon said this week that Atlanta is 3rd in the NFL in explosive plays, and yet still has their offense, they've got some games and then other games that they're just not good offensively. And is that a result of the turnovers? Because I know that the turnover numbers are really, really, they're jarring, because they've had a turnover in 8 straight games. There's been multiple turnovers, I think, in 5 of the last 6, and there's a couple in there with 3. And that's just in the NFL. That is the 90% of the time. That is your basically your money stat. Losing the turnover battle usually means losing games unless you are a far superior team in many other ways.
Absolutely. And I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. I just, our most recent podcast on Bleav in Falcons went up last night, and it was 5 stats that explain the Falcons' 4-5 start. And one of those stats was, of course, the turnover margin. So I've got these numbers ready and handy to go right in front of me. They are -7 right now in turnover differential, which is 2nd worst in the NFL. So, I mean, that right there, you're going to have a really hard time winning football games when you're -7. But they have 9 takeaways, which is 6th fewest. So they're not turning the ball over as frequently as they need to. We've seen it in spurts. They had 2 fumbles last week against Minnesota. Jesse Bates started the season with 3 picks in 2 games. So like you felt that was going to be a part of this defense. It just hasn't been consistently. Offensively, 16 turnovers. That's the 4th most in the league. And you mentioned that they came in bunches. Jacksonville, 2 back-to-back picks on back-to-back drives. One was a pick 6. That totally flipped that game and let Jacksonville take control. Washington, 3 turnovers in the second half, 2 in the fourth quarter, 1 on your final drive when you're kind of trying to make a comeback attempt, 1 when you're down there at the 1-yard line. You have a delay of game that backs you up, and then you throw a pick on the next play because Desmond Ridder looked flustered that he was going to get a second delay of game. It's been kind of comical. And then this past week against Minnesota, late in the third quarter, again, a game that they weren't running away with, but they felt like they were super in control of. Bijan Robinson fumbles. The next series, Taylor Heineke throws a pass behind his receiver. It gets picked off. Ooh. Minnesota then takes control of that game, and we all know what happens from there.
The magic of Josh Dobbs that we never saw here in Arizona. No, honestly, that was because you guys
didn't play. It was either going to be Minnesota or it was going to be Arizona. If Josh Dobbs was on this team still, I guarantee you we would see the same thing this week.
So here's the thing. Bomani Jones famously just says, you knew, or at least said that Josh Dobbs, if there was anyone who knew that could happen, it was Josh Dobbs being offered at Georgia, and that's exactly what happens to the Falcons no matter what.
And see, that is kind of why Bomani is a real one. As much as it seems like he is just crapping on the Falcons, he's not wrong. Like people who live here in Atlanta, we know it.
It's like he sucks. It's like crack you keep going to, and I don't know why I keep going back to him because he let me down every single time.
So Dave Choate, the editor-in-chief at the Falcoholic, always pretty much starts like each Sunday saying "gird your loins" on Twitter, and that might as well, instead of "rise up," the Falcons' official slogan might as well just be "gird your loins" because it's what happens every single week. Like when Scott Hansen on NFL Red Zone calls it the witching hour, and it's just basically the start of the fourth quarter for all these 1:00 games. All 4 quarters are the witching hour for the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, they find ways. Will Levis having a career game, against them in his first start. Josh Dobbs doesn't even know his teammates' names coming out there winning a game against him. So it's one of the reasons I'm a little afraid of Kyler Murray coming back. Like, yeah, he's a bigger name, but like they don't have any film on him. They don't have whatever. A discombobulated offense can be a scary offense anytime they're playing Atlanta.
Yeah. So what are the things, we've talked a lot about what they've struggled with, but what are the things that they do well offensively? And what are the things that they do well defensively?
Yeah, offensively, I mean, I think they have done a better job of expanding their capabilities, right? Coming into the season, everybody expected them to once again be one of the run heaviest teams in the NFL because that's what they were last year. Well, people forget that in 2021, Arthur Smith's first season, they were one of the pass heaviest teams in the NFL. So this is an offense that is capable of changing, not just year to year, but week to week. And that's kind of what we saw under Desmond Ridder in kind of the final few games before he was benched. And he was benched because of those aforementioned turnovers, right? I didn't even mention Tampa Bay, 3 fumbles, 2 of which came at the 1-yard line. One was on a snap on a 1st and 1 at the 1-yard line, or 1st and goal, I guess, the 1-yard line. And then the other was Desmond Ridder running the ball into the end zone and just kind of lets up a half second, like we've seen so many players do, just kind of trots into the end zone. Like Antoine Winfield Jr. pops the ball out. Yep. And it's a touchback instead of a touchdown. And so these are the areas where like they need to get those cleaned up. But outside of that, they're moving the ball. There's a reason why those fumbles came at the 1-yard line, because they are kind of matriculating the ball down the field. But as your stat earlier referenced, like they are getting some explosive plays. Jonnu Smith had a 60-yard screen touchdown against Minnesota. So they are not just a run-oriented or attack anymore. They are finding ways to move the ball through the air much more consistently. They're getting a lot of different people involved, whether it's Jonnu Smith, who I just mentioned, Kaderil Hodge. It's not just Kyle Pitts or Drake London. Frankly, it's not enough of Kyle Pitts for a lot of people, myself included. But that is something that I do think if the turnovers were not occurring, we would be talking about Atlanta's offense as a group that has kind of taken that next step. It's just that the turnovers have prevented that. Defensively, I think you're seeing a unit that's playing really, really connectedly and really well. Grady Jarrett done for the year, and that really sucks, and that hurt to see. But you saw the defensive line respond in a huge way. David Onyemata, 10 tackles, a sack, a forced fumble. Calais Campbell, a sack, a safety. Arnold Ebiketie, a forced fumble. Lorenzo Carter, fumble recovery. So you're seeing the unit really play strongly, and that's also affecting the back end, where the secondary is playing really well, shutting down guys. D. Alford in the slot had kind of some missed tackles that were glaring, but by and large, he's played really well in his first season as a starter. Jeff Okudah looks much more like that third overall pick instead of the guy that we saw once he entered the pros in Detroit. And then AJ Terrell has kind of been up and down a little bit, but the times that he's been up has been awesome. And so you're hoping that that's a little bit more consistent. And then Jesse Bates on the back end, like his leadership really brings it all together. So defensively, there's not maybe one stat like turnovers or sacks or anything like that that jumps out at you. It's just that they never seem to be super out of place. They never seem to be just on their heels. They always seem to be dictating to their opponent kind of what's going on. And that's been refreshing to see.
And you look at the personnel that you'll kind of look at the roster and how things are put together. You like the edge guys that they've got. Ebiketie is a guy that I really wish the Cardinals could have. His athleticism is absurd. The back end looks really good. With Jarrett out, is that interior, like you said that people have stepped up, is the weakness in the middle of the field then? The Falcons have traditionally gone through and had super, very productive linebackers. It seems year after year they're like, let people go. Is this year the difference? Is that where the weakness is defensively this year?
At the linebacker position or just kind of like up the middle in general?
Well, whether it be with Jarrett out, the defensive interior and the middle of the field with the linebackers.
I mean, yeah, it could be. Like, I think that we'll have to see. The Vikings tried that approach, right? And they were pretty abysmal running the ball, but they've been abysmal running the ball all season long. So it's a little bit, all right, chicken or egg type of deal. The Falcons have done a very good job limiting opposing run games. They were touched up the first two games of the season against Carolina and against Green Bay. But since then, they've done a very good job. Now, Grady Jarrett had a big hand in that. They brought in Contavious Street, traded for him from Philadelphia. He was in New Orleans last season with Falcons defense coordinator Ryan Nielsen, was the Saints defensive line coach for a long time. We saw in Street's first game, he recovered one of the fumbles, right? It popped right into his hands. And so it was kind of like, oh, hey, look, welcome to Atlanta. Make a big play. And that's nice to see. I think that the fact that he has experience with Ryan Nielsen means that he's probably come in and hit the ground running, knows what to do. He's played with David Onyemata, who I mentioned, and he's having a great year. So I think it's a little bit of a time will tell what Street's, how big of a drop-off that is from Jarrett to Street. But the Falcons linebackers, they do a really good job, I think, of defending the run because they all are kind of single gapping. The linebackers are running downhill to their fits. And then they use their safeties kind of to confuse things on the back end, and they run a lot of different simulated pressures. So sometimes you'll see Caden Ellis, another former Saint who is playing well in his first season. He's going to look like he's blitzing that A gap. He's going to drop. Maybe then you get Nate Landman, their other linebacker, who is a backup filling in for Troy Anderson, who was lost for the season in week 2. But Nate Landman has played incredibly well as an undrafted player who, they have high hopes for. But they really just want to confuse the quarterback. They want to confuse the offensive line and kind of by extension the running back and fill these gaps hard, make the tackles in the backfield. It's really the missed tackles. That's when you see, but that's with every team, right? Like when you miss a tackle at the line of scrimmage and you're playing a one gap and that gap then becomes free because you missed that tackle, it's going to be a little tough to live that way. And we've seen some teams, if they break through that first line for Atlanta, they can then kind of go and get 12 yards before the next guy brings them down. But by and large, I've been kind of impressed with Atlanta's linebackers and especially their run defense kind of right up the middle.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Seaward podcast, the Mr. Cardinals talk a little bit. Let's move on to the next segment where we talk about this game specifically. Matchups, keys. That's coming up next on Rise Up Seaward. We're back on the Rise Up Seaward podcast, best hour of Cardinals talk on the web with Will McFadden from the Bleav in Falcons podcast and a contributor over at the Falcoholic. Will, let's talk about this game in particular. You talk about how they've been pretty good against the running game. overall. The last 2 weeks, though, and I know that and last week, a lot of that came from Dobbs himself and his 66 rushing yards, but over 140 yards, 140 or more yards allowed in each of the last 2 weeks, that's kind of the money stat that we look at for on the Cardinals side of the ball, because what do the Cardinals have to do to be successful offensively this year? And it's been run the ball. They're getting James Conner back, and Kyler Murray returns to the lineup. And while one of our questions is how much will he be used in terms of his mobility and running the ball, Gannon has kind of said that we're going to use his whole skill set. And when you say that, you cannot ignore his ability to move. And whether that will come a little bit slowly early on, but we look at that, and like Atlanta, who's done really well against the run most of the season, but the last 2 weeks and a couple of losses, those numbers have gone up. Is that an anomaly? Is that the adjustment to Jarrett being out, or could the Cardinals, between Connor and Rondale Moore, those trick type plays or little special plays, or even just running the ball out of the backfield, and Kyler Murray, be able to take advantage of that?
I think so, and I think that's the right way to approach this matchup. Right, when you look at, certainly with James Conner coming back, if you look at the strength of the Cardinals, right, they're fourth in the league right now in rushing yards per play, just a tick under 5 yards per play rushing. So, I mean, that's crazy, and that's a great place to start. And then when you look at the most previous matchup for Atlanta, I mean, Josh Dobbs and his legs won that game for them. And now you've got a player who is much, better known for using his running ability in Kyler Murray. And so I have to believe that as the Cardinals are looking at that film and they're kind of preparing for this week, I think that it's not a coincidence that Kyler Murray is kind of back, and that was the quote that Gannon gave, because it would make a lot of sense to stress Atlanta horizontally by getting Kyler on the move. Hopefully you bring up maybe some of those defenders on the exterior, and then maybe you hit something behind them. But I wouldn't be shocked at all if the Cardinals really try to dictate to Atlanta first and foremost on the ground. Right, you get James Conner going in between the tackles. You get a Rondale Moore kind of stressing the edges. You get Kyler on these boots and fakes and get everybody flowing and running for Atlanta's defense. And then you plan to make those shots kind of behind them. That is something that would concern me for sure if I'm an Atlanta defensive coach, because until you prove that you can get the quarterback down in open space, that is a great way to attack this defense, because you saw a player who, again, 5 days with the team, doesn't really know any of his teammates' names, certainly doesn't know the play, and that was successful for them. So imagine putting a better athlete back there who knows this offense. I know it is a new offense and that he has been injured, and this will be kind of his first regular season game actually running the show, but still, he's going to know what he's doing. He knows Hollywood Brown's name. He knows who James Conner is. He knows these guys. So that is 100% what I expect to see from Arizona on Sunday, is a heavy dose of the run and a heavy dose of play action and rolling out and getting Kyler on the move.
How will the back end use? Are they more of a follow, or are they more a side when it comes to matching up with Michael Wilson and Hollywood Brown?
Historically, the Falcons and A.J. Terrell have been more of a side defense, where A.J. has usually played the left side of the defense. However, this year, again, Ryan Nielsen and Jerry Gray, longtime defensive coach, stops like Green Bay, Cincinnati. So he is really well respected for what he does in the secondary. They have kind of adopted more of the Saints aggressive, physical, we're going to play up close to the line of scrimmage, get our hands on you, and they've moved guys around as well. So they've shadowed a little bit more. You'll see Jeff Okudah mirroring his guy. You'll see A.J. Terrell mirroring, but I also think they kind of mix and match between those. So I don't think that you're necessarily going to see, okay, A.J. Terrell, you just have Marquise Brown, and that's it. Jeff Okudah, you just have this guy, and that's it. Like, they're going to probably swap some things around, because that is part of the design of Atlanta's defense. Atlanta wants to give new looks on every single snap to the quarterback so that he just kind of doesn't get a read on what's coming, or even, hey, this is a matchup that we like. They're not going away from this matchup, so we're going to just pepper this to this guy. The Falcons don't like to make it that easy on offenses.
if you look at, so the Cardinals have a major concern with availability this week with their offensive line. Right now, left tackle DJ Humphries, left guard Tristan Colon, right guard Will Hernandez. It looks like all three are probably going to miss this game. You got Calvin Beachum, who'll play left tackle. You feel okay with that. Dennis Daly at left guard. The truth is that that left guard position, the 3 days that they've had Elijah Wilkinson, former Falcon last year. He started the first half of the season, but wasn't that great. Cologne took over for him. He got hurt. It's Dennis Daly, who played left tackle all last year for Tennessee. Wasn't good at all at left tackle. But at left guard, though, it kind of feels like all three of those guys are more or less the same. There's no real drop-off. Right guard, that's a really big concern because Will Hernandez to either Keith Ismail or Carter O'Donnell. O'Donnell, who was active for the first time last week and had, 17 snaps. I think might be the first. And then Keith Ismail, who's started some games at center for Washington. Who's the guy that will be on that defensive left side more than anything? It's going to match up there against the center and right guard.
Yeah, that would probably be, so that's talking about like an odd or an even front, and they'll like the 3 technique versus the 1 technique. That's part of the reason why I think Street was the guy that the Falcons decided to bring in, because you had that interchangeability between Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata. Both could play that 3 technique, both could play that 1 technique, so it allowed you to set your defense kind of a little bit. And I think that you'll see them still be interchangeable there. But you mentioning all of the kind of offensive injuries, what I think that's going to lead to from Atlanta is something that they do really like to do. And those are the simulated pressures that I talked about. You're going to see, even though Lorenzo Carter and Bud Dupree and Arnold Ebiketie and these guys are all listed as kind of defensive ends, they're kind of like hybrid edge players in a 3-4, even though this is a little bit more of a 4-3 look. So the Falcons never mind, bringing 2 linebackers and then they'll drop their 2 guys. And then you've got 2 A-gap blitzes and then your defensive tackles kind of become your edges. Like they will get interesting and test this offensive line's communication skills, test their familiarity with one another, their ability to pass guys off. So it's not so much that I think the Falcons are going to, isolate Cam Jordan or somebody and say, we're lining you up over this weak point and you're just going to run into it until it gives. They're going to really, I think, mess with the cohesion and the communication of the line, knowing that they've got a few of those key pieces missing, and see if it's a game of telephone, see where that communication breaks down, and can you get a free runner coming at Kyler Murray? The Falcons have been able to do that. They've done a good job. They had some looks against Josh Dobbs. It's just that they have to execute and bring the guy down when they get that free shot. And against Kyler Murray, that's no easy task.
No, well, hopefully not. That's the part. Hopefully, like he's coming back and looking good or even looking better. What are matchups where you like the Falcons in terms of advantage?
Yeah, I think that you'll see Drake London have a big impact in this game. I know that Arizona's secondary has played, well at times. I think a lot of that
been.
Really, I was going to say, I think I attribute them more to the safeties.
Antonio Hamilton will probably draw him more. That's the guy they've tended to use on the bigger, more physical guys.
Yeah, and I think Hamilton has done okay. Like he's been like league average to me. I think Wilson on the other side is a little bit more of that matchup that you look to. So maybe a guy like Van Jefferson, although he has not popped for Atlanta so far since they acquired him. Kadero Hodge is a guy who, if you're talking about Taylor Heineke being the quarterback for, a majority of the season, he's been working with those second team guys. So players like Kadero Hodge or Scotty Miller, or Matt Collins, who has been on the injury report, not practice all week. So I doubt he'll be playing on Sunday, but that is why you're seeing kind of Kadero Hodge be a little bit of a go-to guy over the last couple of weeks since Taylor Heineke has been in there. So he's a little bit of a sneaky X factor if Hamilton is just shadowing Drake London and does, take him away. But even if that's the case, like the Falcons are going to get their looks up to Drake London. He is a jump ball contested catch specialist. So even if he's covered, the Falcons are going to put it up in a spot where he can get it. And he's done a great job of coming down with those those balls so far this year. So that's kind of where I'm looking at it. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but then also you marry that with Tyler Algier kind of right up the middle. So I think you'll see the Falcons do less of the we're going to run the ball on the edges and the exterior, which is what they've kind of liked to do. That's where Bijan Robinson has kind of done his best work. Even Tyler Algier and Cordero Patterson, they can go around the edge. But I think you'll get a heavy dose of Tyler Algier kind of up the middle, and then we'll maybe see Taylor Heineke attack the perimeters and the boundaries a little bit more, which is kind of counterintuitive to Atlanta's offense. They like to attack over the middle, so I'm sure they still will find ways to do that. But when you've got Budda Baker and you've got Thompson kind of prowling the middle of that field, that's where I think you'll see them take their chances maybe on the boundary a little bit more and choose to attack the middle via the run. So that's kind of a matchup I like for Atlanta's offense.
And what are the matchups that you are most concerned about with this matchup? I mean, you've already kind of mentioned the mobility of the quarterback being one.
Yes, that is maybe my like number one concern, because that's to me the way that the clearest path to victory that I can see for Arizona is creating outside of structure, because the Vikings had a great time creating out of structure against Atlanta, because Atlanta's defense wants to kind of force the structure upon the offense and then make plays within it, like put a box around the offense and make them play within that. If you can escape that box and then get Atlanta scrambling a little bit, that is when they are in trouble. And that is when you've seen some explosive plays that frankly other teams have not capitalized on. There have been some dropped passes. There have been some missed throws where guys were open in play action sets. So I think Arizona is definitely going to be looking at that, have a game plan centered around something like that. And it does concern me that that's the case. Flipping over, though, to Arizona's defense, I've liked what I've seen from Zaven Collins in recent weeks. Like, I know the production hasn't necessarily been there, but I just like in the snaps that he's in and when he is rushing the passer, I think he has juice every single time he comes. Again, whether he gets home or not is a little besides the point, because that's just life as a pass rusher. Sometimes you're not going to get there, but when you do, they sometimes come in bunches. And he could be a player that if on Sunday night we're looking back at the box score and it's like Zaven Collins has 1.5 sacks and 2 tackles for a loss, like I wouldn't be shocked, because Atlanta's offensive line has been a little bit shaky in pass protection. Caleb McGarry, especially at right tackle, but Jake Matthews at left tackle as well has not been as strong as he has been previously. So I would look at Collins and Gardeck and some of those guys and say, okay, if they can get Taylor Heineke on the ground or make him uncomfortable, then that's another pretty nice path, I think, to victory for Arizona.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move on to make our predictions for this game. Picks and predictions next. That's coming up on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the Web, talking with Will McFadden from the Bleav in Falcons podcast, and contribute over at the Falcoholic SB Nation's Atlanta Falcons site, almost at Arizona Cardinals site, because that's what I'd say with Seth, my co-host. And so looking to this game, this is, I will say honestly, with Connor coming back, with Kyler coming back, the juice that there's going to be at the home stadium with Kyler's return, this is, I view it for the Cardinals as I predict a Cardinals win, but I think more because of the scenario, because if the Cardinals can't win a game like this with Kyler back, then you're looking at, you've got on the road to Houston, you've got at home against the Rams, who if they've got Matthew Stafford back, you have to wonder, when are those wins coming? And I think that the Cardinals are going to win some games with Kyler at quarterback. And this one is one of those possibilities. But let's hear what you got. What are your thoughts on how this game will actually play out?
I think it'll be close. I totally agree with what you said kind of at the beginning of the podcast, where the Cardinals have been a good, bad team. They have played, even in the games that they've kind of gotten blown out.
Except last week. That was horrific.
They were a bad team.
Oh my gosh.
They were a good God team last week.
That's exactly what they were last week.
So, I mean, if you kind of take that and you take also Atlanta's propensity to just be in these one-score games that come down to the wire, right? Like that's a little bit of a design and not a flaw of Atlanta's, I think, system is they like to have these games go down to the wire, where if you just execute better in the fourth quarter, then you're going to emerge the victor. And so for that reason, I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a scrappy, ugly game at times, because that's just what the Falcons play. But I do think, Taylor Heineke said this week, and it raised a few eyebrows, I think, around the city just because of the game that he invoked. But he said that this week was kind of like a Super Bowl week for the Falcons, right? They're at 4-5. They've got the bye week, and then they've got a 7-game sprint kind of to the end. But a lot of people externally, they are pointing the finger at Arthur Smith. They are ready for him out of here. They have had it with kind of his offense, his way of doing things. I think they want a little bit more ISO ball. They want to see somebody just cook. They want to have, an incredible player who's just taking the league by storm. And that's not what this offense is. This offense is designed to wear teams down, get them into the fourth quarter, and then make their hay. So for that reason, I think the Falcons will win solely because they have to win this game. The Cardinals, you guys are still in the Caleb Williams and the
Cardinals
Drake
don't
May,
have to win
all
any games.
Exactly. There's still a carrot at the stick, whether or not you're 1-16 or you turn this around and you're 9-7 or whatever. But I just think that there's more on the line for Atlanta. So I think this is going to be something like 27-23 Falcons. I think that the Cardinals will get their plays. And I'm not even necessarily opposed to thinking that they're going to be leading 23-20 with 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter. It's just, I think the Falcons will find a way to get something done here on the road because, frankly, they have to.
That makes sense. Look at this game. How many turnovers are there in this game, do you think?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it'll either be this is so it's either going to be surprisingly a lot or surprisingly little. There's a quote. I'm not even going to get it right, but I think there will be, I'll say 3 turnovers. I'm just going to go right in the middle of that number.
With 3, so you're guessing that if with you saying a Falcons win, it'll be 1 turnover for the Falcons and 2 for the Cardinals.
I think so, but I wouldn't even, they beat Tampa Bay turning the ball over 3 times, right? It's just that's going to be a lower scoring game because the Falcons have been moving the ball offensively. It's just they've not been scoring points. So I could even see it being 2 Atlanta turnovers and 1 for Arizona and them still finding a way to get things done. But yeah, I think it'll be kind of a 1-2 type of deal.
I have this game at 24-20 Cardinals, and I think it comes down to the wire. Like in a perfect world, it would be a Kyler Murray late fourth quarter winning drive to bring Kyler's magic.
That's your storybook ending.
Yes, I could also see a scenario. This is where my co-host Seth Cox predicted that it would be, the Falcons with the ball trying to do it and turn the ball over. In that it'll be a Taylor Heineke mistake towards the end of the game that'll and honestly the turnovers happen in that scenario because that's when you're playing from behind. You have to try things, and then that can kind of do that. But I think is probably there's going to be multiple turnovers by someone. And, yeah, I do think this is going to be a really intriguing game. The Cardinals with Connor in the lineup average 22 points a game. Cardinals with no Connor, the 4 games that he missed, 10.6 points a game. And so, if anything else, when Josh Dobbs looked pretty good, it was with Connor in the lineup. The moment he was out, that was when the floor, he went from playing near his ceiling to playing very, very badly. And then on top of that, and Imari DeMarcado, their undrafted rookie out of TCU, he was hurt, and the run game was still steady. DeMarcado's probably out this week, but last week, it was the perfect storm of crap because you got Clayton Tune, first NFL start against the number 1 defense in the NFL, and 2 running backs that have a career rushing average of under 3 yards a carry. Keontae Ingram and Tony Jones. It was bad. They had 13 rushing yards on 16 rushing attempts that weren't Clayton Tune scrambles. They're designed runs, 13 yards and 16 carries, and I think that changes this week. So now, if we're picking sacks, how many times do you think Atlanta gets Kyler? How many times do you think the Cardinals get Heineke?
I think Atlanta will get Kyler twice. And I think the Cardinals will get Heineke I'm also going to say twice.
Ah.
You know, I don't think sacks are going to be the reason that this game gets out of hand one way or unless there's like a strip sack or a sack fumble. But I think you'll see the Falcons do a good job of harassing Kyler Murray when he gets out of the pocket. I don't know if that's going to necessarily lead to a bunch of sacks. And then offensively, I think this will be a game that Atlanta, you know, I mentioned Zaven Collins. I mentioned kind of my fear there, but I think this will be a game where Atlanta's offensive line does kind of get things going in the right direction.
And who do you think who do you think ends up with more rushing yards? Connor, Algier, or Bijan?
I think it'll be Connor because there's just one of him.
Right.
If you were going to add up the total, but I will say of the Falcons guys, I think you'll see Tyler Algier with more rushing yards. I wouldn't be shocked though if Bijan Robinson is like the team's leading receiver. I think you'll see them because
there's a nice prop. There's a nice prop for Bijan at 3.5. I think it's I'll have to pull that up because that was the prop for that Seth gave me. Is
it like with both of them or just Bijan?
It's just Bijan over 3.5 receptions.
Oh, take the over all day on that.
And I think it hadn't juiced. It was, and it's plus 130. So that's a juicy odds right there.
I would take that unless they're thinking like Buddha is going to be kind of shat. But even that, like I would take the over on that in a heartbeat because there's been a lot made of Bijan Robinson's usage, especially down in the red zone. Like he is as much a receiver in this offense as he is a running back. And given the Tyler Algier's ability to run in between the tackles, and that's kind of where I think the Cardinals defense is maybe most susceptible. That is where I think you'll see Tyler Algier get the handoffs up the middle. Bijan is going to kind of work out in the flats, maybe work on some of those angle K routes and just be a more equipped receiver in this game. So I like James Conner to lead them all on the ground, but then I'll split mine with the Falcons there.
And one last one, more passing yards, Kyler Murray, Taylor Heinicke.
I'll say Taylor Heinicke in this one. I have felt like the Falcons, honestly, since kind of the Tampa Bay game, after their win against Houston, they went on the road, and that was the first time where the Falcons moved the ball just up and down the field, and they just couldn't punch the ball in the end zone. And Taylor Heinicke, like I said, I think he brings a higher floor. I think he's got a nice command of this passing offense, and I just keep waiting for this Falcons offense to put one game together where they are scoring the ball, where they are moving the ball, and just waiting for them to put like 38 up on somebody, because I think that's there. Again, that's not my score prediction for this game. You heard it. I just think that maybe Taylor Heinicke can tap into that a little bit more and throw the ball around.
And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast, Best Hour of Cardinals Talk on the web, episode 485. We've been talking to Will McFadden from the Bleav in Falcons podcast and also over at the SB Nation's The Falcoholic. You can find Will on the network that I still call Twitter at Will McFadden, and as part of the Bleav network over there. Will, appreciate your time. And of course, you can also catch his work over on the Falcoholic. You'll find that site along with Seth's site on the SB Nation's 300 plus site of team sites and blogs over there. SB Nation, which was my former home long time ago. For my writing stuff. So, Will, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. And with that, Seth and I will be back to talk on Tuesday night. You guys will hear it on Wednesday when it drops. Hopefully talking about, we'll see what happens, whether it's a Cardinals win, whether it's a disappointment, how good Kyler Murray is. Thanks for listening. We will be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up Red C, be Red C-Red, and of course, Rise up C-Red.